On True Crime Threads, we reveal Maya's fight for survival after betrayal and an unplanned pregnancy. Maya, a 16-year-old high school student, had always been a good student and a daughter her parents could count on. Growing up in a small town, her life felt simple and predictable. She spent her time studying, hanging out with friends, and daydreaming about the future. She was the kind of teenager who always had a plan and was focused on the next step in life. With her solid academic performance and a close-knit group of friends, Maya never imagined that her life would take such an unexpected and dramatic turn. Her life changed the day she met Jason. He was 18, confident, and knew how to make an impression. He was new to town, and the moment Maya crossed paths with him, something about him caught her attention. Jason was different from the other boys in her school. His confidence was magnetic, and his rebellious streak made him seem intriguing and exciting. He didn't care about rules, and Maya found herself drawn to his carefree attitude. He made her feel special, something she had never truly experienced before. They started spending more time together. At first, it was just casual talking after school, grabbing a coffee, and hanging out in the local park. Jason always had a way of making Maya feel like she was the most important person in the world. He would compliment her, make her laugh, and listen to everything she said with genuine interest. Maya, still a bit naive, was swept away by his attention. Her friends, though a little skeptical, didn't see anything alarming. Jason seemed like a bad boy, but nothing too dangerous. Maya's growing affection for him overshadowed any doubts that might have crossed her mind. As their relationship deepened, Jason became more persistent. He made promises that everything would be okay between them, that they could handle whatever came their way. Maya, feeling both excited and unsure, followed along, trusting his words. At first, everything seemed perfect. Jason made her feel like she belonged to something larger than her small-town life. But as time went on, things started to shift. Jason's need to push boundaries grew, and Maya found herself in situations she wasn't prepared for. She felt pressure from him to take their relationship to places she wasn't ready for. Maya, unsure of how to handle the mounting pressure, began to question herself. The boy she had fallen for was no longer the person who made her feel special. His charm had turned into manipulation, and she was too young to recognize it at the time. That night, when everything changed, Maya thought she was just doing something for him. But she had no idea how deeply that one decision would affect her future. The mistake was made, and Maya's life would never be the same. Maya's life became a whirlwind of confusion. She tried to ignore the growing signs of her pregnancy, hoping they would go away. But as her body began to change, it became impossible to hide the truth. The morning sickness was relentless, and her clothes started to fit differently. The more she tried to convince herself it was nothing, the more obvious it became. The fear that had already started to build within her intensified. She couldn't face the reality of what had happened. Maya wasn't ready to be a mother. She was still a teenager, with so many dreams ahead of her. But now she was trapped in a nightmare she couldn't escape from. The hardest part was telling her parents. Maya couldn't bring herself to do it. She feared their disappointment and their anger, knowing she had let them down. Her parents had always trusted her, and now, with this secret hanging over her, she felt like she was betraying them. So she kept quiet, hoping the situation would somehow resolve itself. Days turned into weeks, and the weight of the secret grew heavier. She felt suffocated by it, unable to talk to anyone. Even her friends, who had once been so close, noticed she was pulling away. Maya could no longer keep up the pretense that everything was fine. Jason, once the center of her world, began to fade into the background. At first he seemed to be a little more distant, but Maya tried to convince herself it was just a phase. He had promised to support her, to be there for her no matter what. But as time passed, he became more and more elusive. His calls grew fewer, and when they did talk, it was always about how things were difficult for him too. He never once took responsibility for what had happened. Maya felt abandoned, isolated in her fear and confusion. She realized, slowly and painfully, that she couldn't rely on him. The loneliness grew unbearable. Maya felt like she was living in a different world, a world where she was the only one who knew the truth. Every time she looked in the mirror, the reflection that stared back at her was a reminder of what she had done. She tried to focus on her schoolwork, but it was impossible to concentrate. The reality of her situation consumed every thought, and she couldn't shake the sense of impending doom. She knew something had to give, but she couldn't figure out how to fix it, or if it could even be fixed. With each passing day, the pressure mounted, and Maya could feel the walls closing in around her. As the weeks went by, Maya's world continued to shrink. She felt more and more isolated, consumed by a secret she couldn't share with anyone. The more she tried to pretend everything was normal, the more difficult it became to keep up the facade. Her friends, once her closest companions, began to notice how distant and withdrawn she had become. They had been asking questions, trying to get her to open up, but Maya couldn't bring herself to tell them the truth. Every time they brought it up, the weight of her secret became even harder to bear. The physical changes in her body were impossible to ignore. Her clothes no longer fit, and the subtle signs of pregnancy became more obvious with each passing day. She couldn't hide it anymore, but telling someone felt like the hardest thing she would ever do. Every morning she woke up feeling the physical discomfort of her condition, but it was the emotional burden that truly weighed on her. The fear of what was coming next overwhelmed her, and the thought of facing her parents filled her with dread. Her relationship with Jason continued to deteriorate. He had promised to be there for her, but it became clear that he had no intention of following through. His calls became less frequent, and when they did speak, his tone was distant. He never acknowledged the gravity of the situation. The person she had once trusted was now just a memory, and she realized she was alone in this. Jason had moved on, and Maya was left to face the consequences of their actions on her own. Maya tried to push forward, to find a way to handle things on her own. She buried herself in schoolwork, hoping that focusing on her studies would distract her from the overwhelming reality of her situation. But it didn't work. The pressure continued to build, and soon even school became an impossible challenge. Her grades slipped as she struggled to focus, her mind constantly preoccupied with what was happening inside her. Her teachers noticed the change in her behavior and tried to reach out, but Maya couldn't bring herself to accept their help. She couldn't bring herself to face anyone. The world outside her secret felt like it was closing in, and all she wanted was for everything to stop. The fear she had tried to suppress now consumed her. She couldn't escape it. Every day felt like a countdown, and the further along she got in her pregnancy, the harder it became to keep pretending. Maya's body was changing in ways she couldn't control, and with each change came a new wave of anxiety. She was scared, lost, and uncertain about what the future held. Just as Maya thought she couldn't endure anymore, her breaking point arrived. One evening, after weeks of constant nausea, dizziness, and sleepless nights, she collapsed. The pain had become unbearable, and Maya's body could no longer handle the strain. Her parents, who had been growing more concerned about her health, rushed her to the hospital. As soon as they arrived, doctors immediately took over, realizing the severity of the situation. The truth was out now. Maya was pregnant, and she was dangerously ill from the physical toll it was taking on her young body. She had avoided seeking help for so long, and now she was paying the price. At the hospital, the doctors informed Maya's parents that her pregnancy was high risk. She was far too young to carry a child, and complications could arise if they didn't take immediate action. The decision to tell her parents was the hardest thing Maya had ever done, but once the truth was out, there was no turning back. Her mother, shocked and devastated, held her in a tight embrace, whispering words of comfort, while her father stood quietly, processing the information. Maya, for the first time in months, let herself cry. The dam she had built around her emotions finally broke, and the weight of the secret she had carried for so long poured out of her. She had kept it all inside, convinced that telling her parents would break them, but now, in the safety of the hospital, she felt the relief that came with finally being honest. As the hospital staff discussed the best course of action, Maya was confronted with a harsh reality. The pregnancy was far more complicated than she had realized. The doctors explained that if she continued with the pregnancy, it could jeopardize her health permanently. They urged her to consider other options. It was in this moment of uncertainty that Maya finally understood how truly trapped she was. She had always hoped that things would get better, but the truth was that her options were limited, and time was running out. While Maya was processing the overwhelming reality of her situation, the hospital staff began investigating Jason's role in all of this. His involvement was crucial, and with the news of her pregnancy confirmed, the doctors asked about his whereabouts. Maya, still too afraid to face the full weight of what had happened, was silent. She didn't know where he was anymore, or if he cared. But as the investigation continued, it became clear that Jason had abandoned her in her time of need. He had disappeared from her life completely, leaving her to face the consequences alone. The discovery hit Maya harder than she could have imagined. Not only was she alone, but she had been abandoned by the one person she thought she could count on. The betrayal stung deep, but Maya's focus had to shift to her own survival. Her health and future were on the line, and for the first time she realized that she had to make choices for herself. As Maya's due date approached, she tried to prepare herself for the unimaginable. Each day felt like a countdown, and the closer she came to giving birth, the more anxiety gripped her. Her body was tired, her emotions drained, and the weight of everything that had happened hung heavily over her. She had once been a girl full of dreams and possibilities, but now she felt like a shadow of herself. Still, she tried to hold on to hope, reminding herself that things would eventually get better. She had the support of her parents, and they were doing everything they could to help her through this difficult time. But just when Maya thought things couldn't get worse, a shocking revelation changed everything. The night she went into labor, she learned something that would forever alter the way she viewed her past. Jason, the boy who had once promised to be there for her, had been living a completely different life. The truth came out that Jason had been involved with several other girls during their time together. He had used his charm and manipulative ways to build relationships with multiple young girls in different towns, always promising them the world, only to abandon them when the relationship became too serious. Maya wasn't the only one he had hurt. He had lied to her, but he had lied to many others as well. The revelation hit Maya like a ton of bricks. The boy she had trusted, the one she thought would always be by her side, had been nothing more than a predator, preying on vulnerable young girls like herself. It was a bitter pill to swallow, knowing that her pain wasn't unique, that others had suffered in the same way she had. But as painful as the truth was, it also gave Maya a sense of clarity. She wasn't the problem. Jason was. He had manipulated her, using her for his own gain, and leaving her to pick up the pieces of a shattered life. The truth came out during a police investigation that had been initiated after multiple reports from the other girls who had been hurt by Jason. Maya's story was just one of many, and it wasn't long before Jason was arrested and charged with multiple offenses. The news spread quickly, and people in the community began to talk about the boy who had shattered so many lives. But even as the authorities took action, Maya knew that the damage had already been done. Jason would face the consequences, but for her, the road to recovery was just beginning. Maya gave birth to a healthy baby, and while her life had been forever changed, she was determined to move forward. With the love and support of her parents, she started to heal, learning to balance the responsibilities of motherhood with the need to reclaim her own identity. She knew her life would never be the same, but she was no longer afraid of what the future held. The journey ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in months, Maya felt a sense of control over her life. The pain of the past would never completely disappear, but she was ready to face whatever came next, stronger and wiser than before.